Extras. This is going to be a bit of a short extras, unless my patrons have a bunch of questions. It was going to focus on telling Balvan's story, helping to explain the maze and other things, but that got a little out of control, and instead turned into the Saga of Balvan video. If you haven't heard it yet, go check it out. The dungeon inside the mountain had been described as a labyrinth, so a maze. I wanted there to be a very literal maze to pose an interesting challenge in what had been billed as a low monster dungeon. But this of course raised the issue. The party is high enough level to cast Find the Path, and I know they're aware of it. FTP is pretty much a one-casting solution to any maze. Sure, you can fill the place with traps, as long as they are traps which don't physically block the path, since if they did, FTP would even help bypass them. Normally, you'd fill the gap with monsters, but I'd limited myself there already. The mistress and her brood weren't really servants of Swain, nor were they directly in the dungeon, technically. But if I fudged that much more, it would make it seem like the Rajas had been incorrect or lied in their description. However, looking at Find the Path, it had one big hole that normally doesn't come up, which I could make use of. It only works for a destination on the same plane. And I thought, what if the shortest path to the target went through another plane? We've previously established my interpretation that FTP only tells you information relative to where you are now. It doesn't plan ahead. Based on that, I figured that for my dimension-crossing path, the spell would calculate the correct path, magically knowing you need to enter the Fadelands here to come out over there. But per the description, the spell would provide no information while in a different plane than the target destination, though it would kick back in when you returned if it had duration left. Thus was born the Triplanar Labyrinth. Of course, then I had to build the actual maze. To build a 3D maze, like one plane of this labyrinth, I would first take graph paper, 1 sheet per floor, and draw the outside border of the maze on each so they line up. The floors don't have to be the same shape or size by any means, but it does make it a lot easier. Then, pick a number of squares where the floors are connected. On the higher of the 2 floors, place a down arrow in the square, and in the same exact spot on the floor below, place an up arrow. This is also the time when you'll want to plot out any multi-floor features, like a huge chasm going past the bottom, a sloped rubble area where multiple floors have collapsed into one another, or a huge sleeping god whose body is a big solid obstacle from top to bottom. You should also add the entry point, and exit and or treasure and or boss room. Now you're ready to add the annoying walls, the thing that makes it a maze. But there's a trick to it. First, draw out the correct path through the maze, winding round, up and down through those vertical connections connecting to the entrance to the goal. Obviously, you aren't showing this copy to the players. Once you have the true path that you drew just in a blank maze, if you want it to be a hard maze with a single path, you can draw walls that divide the map, breaking it up into a few big sections that are connected only by the path. In a 3D map, you have to pay attention to the vertical joins when blocking it off. But having the path set out, plus these big sections, helps you to make sure that the maze is solvable, but with only one solution. If you want it to be easier, you can then draw additional paths that leave and rejoin the original path, making the extra openings in your bigger sections. Once you're satisfied with the solutions, you can then go back and draw in all those squirrely little zigzag walls and twists and turns within each big section to make it mazy. Do keep in mind that just a huge maze like mine, without magical assistance, is probably more annoying than fun. You probably want it smaller and or to have a plan for why it will be interested to get lost in there. Maybe some kind of help or some way to reveal parts of the true path. Of course, that was all for a multi-floor map in one plane. If you want to multiply it out to a giant multi-planar mess like in episode 48, I would just cheat. I only created such a ridiculous map because the players had Find the Path and some ability to smash through walls. If they were going to cheat the crazy maze, I'm not spending days drawing all those little walls times 4 floors times 3 planes. They're just going to break it. So it was mostly abstracted. In this case, it was more mystery and ambiance than a real threat. Although it would have been quite a different story, and I'd have played it less fast and loose if Balvan had been pursuing them. I also would have placed a couple of points of interest to liven it up if I'd had more time to prepare, but I was too busy looking ahead. The previous visions had shown the party the hard Shadowfell life that had forced this person to feel like they needed power to protect themselves and to save their town, and the power they found came in the form of necromancy, which had already taken a physical toll on them, even as rejection hurt them in deeper ways. Now we inhabit their perspective as they are isolated, alone, and we see that they have transformed themselves not to need other people, or food, or air. Hard to say how much time has passed, but the young necromancer has transformed into a lich, an intelligent, immortal, spell-casting skeletal being. The transformation is already complete. The key that unshackled him as a child is now the key that unshackles him from mortality, from any connection to the natural world. But all that is subtext. What he is showing them in the vision is the great lengths to which he is going to protect that immortality. Why he shows it to those entering his lair is a different mystery. After all, he went to such trouble to hide his phylactery inside a dangerous monster in the deep dark sea. Why then reveal your weakness? Black actually recognized those arches, though they looked a little bit different here. The Vistrian party members knew the Fadelands equivalent of the place in the vision, off the province of Land's End. In fact, the whole peninsula is a duchy called Archtide, named after those coastal arches. Though they look a little different from the Shadowfell rocks in the vision, because erosion in the Shadowfell seems to leave things a lot pointier than normal erosion. Angel proved the only one to save against all the visions, despite Mora hauling the traitorous green torch and its -10 will saves all this way. As I warned, this one got cut short because I made the giant Saga of Balvan video, part 1, and I'm still working on part 2. I'll try to finish up Extras 49 soon, but in the meantime, my generous Patreon patrons who get extras a week early had a bunch more questions about this and previous episodes. Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin asked, how were you going to use Balvan if time ran out? Once they made the deal to bypass him peacefully, I didn't really think much more about it, because it seemed very unlikely they'd stick around the full 24 hours to find out. If they had fought him, I expected it to start a whole lot like the post-credits what-if scene where Little One threw him off the ledge, and he jumped/bounced back up. But after that, it would have been him chasing them relentlessly, after they got the message about how tough he is, which may have taken multiple attempts. They would run for a while, and he would inevitably catch up, because he can take shortcuts with his ability to pass through stone, and every time they hit a vision, he would catch up by the time they awoke, though he wouldn't attack them when they were unawares. But he's not so interested in fighting, just in getting them out of the mountain, so there may still have been opportunity to discuss things between beatings. After the first vision, he would have warned them, "It will only get worse if you continue." Also, if it started getting old, there are other ways to vary the encounter. For example, he doesn't necessarily get along with the mistress, though he would not enter the cathedral while the Grisgall was fighting. Michael Cowty asked, why are you mispronouncing my name? I mean, do you know how long, in walking hours, a maze crossing the 3 planes could take the players in a brute force attack, such as turning right every time? I have no idea. I don't even know if the right-hand rule works in 3 dimensions, let alone more, and I don't do that kind of math. But Jay, by the way, pointed out, rules like the right-hand rule won't help you here. You need to implement some kind of depth-first graph traversal algorithm, linked to Wikipedia/graph_traversal, which requires excellent mapping or lots of chalk markings. For their part, Jay, by the way, asked, I got the impression from the maps in the episode that the mazes in each plane didn't overlap spatially that much. So was it more like a 3D maze spread across 3 planes than a true 4D maze? Or does it just seem that way as a consequence of trying to represent it on a 2D screen? Also, were there any connections directly from the Shadowfell to the Feywild, or does one have to go via the Fadelands? The internal walls in each plane were different, although the overall location, the outer bounds of the maze, were supposed to be the same, and I'm sure I messed that up in some places. In this maze, you do always have to pass through the middle world of the Fadelands to reach one of the other planes. Elsewhere in the world, direct natural portals between Fae and Fel do exist, but they are very rare, much more rare than portals to and from the Fadelands. Leah E. Williams asked, so could you theoretically round a 180-degree bend, transition to another plane, then round another 180-degree bend, and be at that same original 3D coordinates without transitioning back to the previous plane? No. The transition area has to be an empty space on both planes, so that space can connect up. You could move around behind it and all the different tunnels in super confusing ways, but the specific short span of tunnel where the transition is, that part has to be clear in both planes. Timofey Prazolov asked, why does your world consist of only 3 planes? Is there more in theory? Is there a special god lore about creation of such planes, or why these particular 3 planes are connected? In addition to the 3 planes, there are several distant planes mortals can't visit, the astral sea, heaven, and hell, and a couple of physics planes, which you also can't visit, the ethereal plane and the plane of shadow, which both overlap the main 3. But there are only the 3 material planes where mortals live. It's thought that there was originally just one world, one material plane. But the Feywild and Shadowfell were like reflections of the Fadelands created by the energies released in the conflict between Ioun and Vecna. That's why, at least superficially, they both seem more magical, and yet the ceiling and floor show them to be, in a sense, incomplete. The problem is, that mythological explanation conflicts with some other myths and legends, because most stories suggest that mortals arose around the same time on all 3 planes, whereas the story of Vecna is very clear that there were other creatures around whom he dealt with while building up power to confront Ioun at the source. So, not all of these things can be true, but that's mythology for you. Daniel Norman asked, so would it be possible, in theory, for you to mine straight down under the mountain in the normal plane and enter the maze from there? Of course you couldn't in the Feywild, because there's indestructible stone in between the surface and the maze. But in the Fadelands, now that they know where it is, the party really could theoretically find the right spot on ground mount and mine into that maze. I wouldn't advise it. They're all out of stone rings to barter with. Grim Reaper 00X and Leah E. Williams asked, were there any other interesting places, items, etc. that the players missed, or which didn't make it into the episode? And did they harvest anything from the spiders, Monster Hunter style? We fast-forwarded a lot of repetitive maze stuff, more cube traps which they bypassed or intentionally triggered now that they knew they were a threat. As I mentioned, I really should have added some points of interest to the maze. And man, it wouldn't take that long, it would have been a lot cooler, but I sadly didn't at the time. The only significant thing they missed so far was way back at the chasm, across the lower ridge from the rune room, there was a cave full of stalagmites and stalactites containing 2 Balhanoths, and, a level 9 wand of magic missiles, which could be used on the rune, and having 5 missiles to match the 5-fold symmetry might also have clued in players if they didn't have Find the Path. As for the Mistress, Draven always collects samples. SZ Banal asked, where did those summoned elementals come from? Guessing it wasn't Swain, since you explicitly said you were pushing it with the Mistress, but Balvan never struck me as the wizardly type. The elementals were summoned by a trap near the exit to the maze. Though the trap covered a wide area, it may have been more of the plot-based encounter variety than the disarmable variety, since they'd gone a long time without any combat. I want to give a big thanks to all my generous Patreon patrons. You have all really come through to make Operation Awesome Unemployment a reality, starting about a month from now. I'm mostly excited, though my limbic system is pretty sure I should be punished for making such a massive change when, quote, everything was going fine in my life. Thanks so much for your continued support, with a special shout out to... Oh my god, I used to call out every member of the organization and every extras, and now there are like 1 billion of you. Aether Mordu, Arkin, Bedimir, Bigrin, Brethren, Corlin, Duskmar, Fireborn, Fright Knight, Earl of Sanguine, Gandurk, Git Hype, Gorfiend, Greenmute, Nine, Hakun, John, Lonito, Lord Abun, Malison Desh, OI1, Olden Man, Pedrig of Rooney, Ramar Ulfist, Stan the Man, Starfall, Surf USA, Tambu and June, Valis, Volkfang, Zombie, and Warsaw, the members of the organization in almost alphabetical order but slightly adjusted to fit my black and white grid because some characters look better on certain backgrounds. I don't know if I can do that every time. We'll see what happens.